So hello and welcome to this course on 20th century American drama. We were discussing the play Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf by Edward Albee. We have already finished Act 1 and today in today's lecture we are going to finish Act 2 and in the next lecture we are going to finish Act 3 and thereby completing our reading of the play. And I just realized I haven't introduced myself yet. I am Soham Chakraborty and I am a PhD scholar at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences here at IIT Madras. So, Act 2, it is called Walpurgisnacht. So, if you see it's a German term. So, it means the night of Saint Walpurga. So, Saint Walpurga is someone who rids people of evils and witches and everything, and there is Saint Walpurga's night which starts on 30th April at night and it ends with the onset of May 1. So, it's almost like a Halloween-esque ritual that takes place over through the time, and you can see the structure of the play also parallels something like that we have this whole night revelry, almost witch revelry of witches and evil devils. There are no proper or sober characters here. We have Martha, who's almost like painted as a witch, and everyone is called in animal terms. And she's probably also literally called witch at a point. So, we have to keep that in mind. And another very important thing is to see that it's been put in German. So, we were talking about the shadow of the Cold War on this text in one of the previous lectures. So, why put this in German, this title in German? It's one of the reason is this play, as we discussed, it was first performed in 1962. And in 1961, 13th August, we see the Berlin Wall going up. So, the Berlin Wall was this attempt by Russia to shield one part of Berlin from the other part, to create that east and west divide. And it seemed like, there is this new order that is coming slowly, and that new order seemed very bleak, that there are divisions being created, there are divisions across Europe. And we discussed how this play kind of draws on the idea of European tradition of civilization. So, we see these walls are coming up in this European, where we have thought it as a pan country, across countries, international civilization that goes to other places also. We have seen references to that through many references to different places. But so, this is creating a geopolitical issue, and this is being written at the heels of such geopolitical issue. This Berlin Wall is going up, there is Cold War, and there is a lot of tension in the air. And you see that the new order that is coming up, the new order that is being promised, isn't actually a very promising one. It's not a very optimistic one. Like we'll see later when the Berlin Wall is crashed. I mean, that's not in the play, that does not happen in the play, but if you look at the jubilation when the Berlin Wall was brought down, it was crashed, it was broken, that people felt like a sort of connection was being made, felt like another new world was coming up. It felt like an event that the old world will die away and the new will come. And if you see something like this idea of celebrating something through the night is also like that. We kind of celebrate a new year also through the night, that it signifies with the ending of the night that an old order is coming to an end and a new order is coming. So, Tennyson in one of his poems writes, "Ring in the new, ring out the old." So, that's the thing. But as we are ringing in the new, there is something of a suspicion with the new in this play. There is suspicion with youth. There is a quite a proper suspicion of youth, that George cannot believe that Nick and Honey are the people of the future, that they will hold on to what probably are traditional things. We have seen at a place, if you read the play also, George says that there might not be any history or literature or philosophy after people like Nick take over. So, there is also certain kind of pessimism of the old world passing, the old order passing. But as we also see through the figure of George, that the old order is also not presented as something very desirable. The old order is also kind of emasculated, it's unproductive. If you see it through the figures of George and Martha, that they haven't reproduced, they don't have a child, though that is the central lie, the central game that they play in this play, but you would see that that is not how it works. So, there is this lack of reproduction, lack of proper organic production in the old world that is taken up, and the production that the new world is also promising isn't also organic in a sense. As we discussed, it's filled with ideas of cloning, it's filled with ideas of synthetic production, that kind of thing. So it will probably be laboratory made, and people will probably lose their intimacy, they'll probably lose their proximity, and that kind of world order, that the synthetic space of the laboratory, that is where people are being produced. So there is a sort of skepticism about everything, like the old order that is passing, it is not very fondly looked upon, and the new order that is coming is not very fondly looked upon. So we have this liminal period of the night time, and that kind of stresses the idea of the revelry of the devils and the witches, that this is a totally unproductive activity. Whatever they're just playing fun and games. And what are fun and games? Fun and games are mostly unproductive. They're not work. While with the term work, we have connotations of productivity, production. With fun and games, we do not have the connotation of productivity. It's an unproductive activity in a sense. And again, like we mentioned, that this new production that is coming, it is still haunted by the old order, that this creating the superhuman race that Nick is talking about, it takes into account the eugenics of Nazi regime, that the Nazis had this production of eugenicist ideology, where a certain race is better than the others, where a superhuman civilization could be brought ahead, pushed ahead through this production of these superhuman kind of people who would take that forward. So you see that there is this idea of taking civilization forward, making history, that kind of idea is embedded in that, which is work, which is production. But on the opposite side, fun and games, that they don't actually do anything, and by the end of the play we'll see that nothing quite actually happens in a sense, but it's just like lot of chaos of an intermediate time. But that is probably what he's stressing here, Edward Albee, this liminality of the time, what the experience of living in a time where you can't very optimistically look back on the past, and the future is also not looking very nice. So we have this, we'll get to the play. So the play is starting, and we have only Nick and George on the stage right now. Martha and Honey are not on the stage. Honey is sick from the drinking, and she is puking. So we have this image that Honey pukes a lot. She is sickly a lot. She also is told to have a sickly figure. So there is this idea of sickness that is associated with Honey. So she is getting sick, and like one of the terms for vomiting is also getting sick. So and we discussed last time how George and Nick are George is trying to connect with Nick on at a level. He's trying to connect with Nick in a way that they haven't, but Nick kind of thwarts that kind of initiative on George's part to do this kind of interaction, to do this kind of connection. So again, like we'll see here, this play also, this act also starts like that, and since they have not connected, we'll see that their relationship will go farther downstream due to the lack of that connection. And they're saying here that, that George says that you're ridiculing me, you're tearing me down in front of my wife, you think that I care for it. And Nick also is cold, unfriendly, and we mentioned the importance of this immaculate stage descriptions, that he's cold, he's unfriendly, he's not connecting, he's withdrawn from George. That he says, well, no, I don't imagine you care for it at all. George, oh, you don't imagine it, huh? So you see that it's a slugfest of that, how less I care. It's like to tell the other person that I know you're talking shit about me, but look how less I care. So this idea of I don't care, you won't be able to hurt me, this kind of isolation of the self from what happens outside, that becomes a sort of empowerment, that okay, look, I'm isolated from your barbs. When we see that they have come together to talk, to mix, even though we have seen how problematic the references to mixing are in the play, but they have come together to mix, but at the same time they say like, oh no, you cannot have any impact on me. Whatever I'm doing, I don't care for it at all. And George at one point says that your sympathy disarms me, your compassion makes me weak, large, salty, unscientific tears. And Nick says, I just don't see why you feel you have to subject other people to it. And Nick is like, if you and your wife want to go at each other like a couple of animals, I don't see why you don't do it when there aren't any, that why don't you do it in private? Why don't do it in the privacy? And this idea of privacy and the private sphere and the public sphere as different is again a very problematic thing in the play, because the playhouse, if you think as a structure, is very interesting. So here we have the glimpse of the inside of a couple, which is a very intimate space, and another couple has been invited there, and the things they are doing is kind of within the privacy of their space. But you would see like different mentions in the play where Martha says, we have guests, we have people over. So you see that it's a space that is again liminal between the private and the non-private, between the private and the public. So it's a space that is in between those spaces. And if you think that this is, again, as I mentioned, that this is a very self-reflexive play, this is a play that knows it's a play. That's why we have these mentions of truth and false, of reality and illusion, because a play, a literature, a work of art does those things. It mixes up what is true. It has its own order of truth, in a way to say that what happens in the book, they have their own order of truth to them. And so the playhouse, if we think of it as a space, on the stage we have this idea of that it's the interior space of a couple's house, and then you have the audience watching the play. So every time all this, and you would see that there were a lot of charges against the play of profanity, of obscenity, that it is kind of showing in the public sphere what it should not be exposing in the public sphere. So that idea is constantly there, and the voyeuristic gaze of the audience is also accommodated in the play. When they say like, we have guests over, you can't do this right now, we have to also understand that it also refers to other people who are watching that time, which are the audience. So the audience is also very interestingly taken into account into the fabric of the play, and I would like you to explore this kind of meta structures that the play employs, these self-reflexive ideas that the play employs, that it understand that it's a play. And that's where also the plays of reality and illusion and this kind of public sphere, private sphere, this problematization of these things come up. And so again, like I mentioned, that Nick and George could not connect on a proper level. So what happens is that we have seen already that this is a highly misogynistic play. The portrayal of women is very demeaning at certain points, to say the least. And you'll see like George and Nick here connect over one of those paltry things, one of those ugly things that, that they kind of talk ill of their wives in front of each other. So it's a very shallow bonding in a sense, while the previous attempt was bonding or was on a more personal level, on what probably brings them together at an existential level. This next one is very frivolous, very, again, like we would remember the reference to fun and games, right? But again, another thing that Albee does is to show you that fun and games are not always innocent, that fun and games can have diabolic characters. As we see that the games they play are diabolic in nature, in a sense. So this is also something, this superficial, this shallow connect that is going to start, which seems like a very harmless, like, banter that people do, it will soon turn very dark. So the fun and games, there's it's all fun and games till someone loses an eye. So people can be said to like frequently lose an eye and their dignity in the play, in a manner. So Nick says here that he married Honey because she was pregnant, which is to say that I didn't marry her because I loved her, but rather that she was pregnant. And George says that, but you said you didn't have any children. When I asked you, he said, so Nick says that it was a hysterical pregnancy. She blew up and then she went down. So you see, it's like almost an object-like way of talking. It's like inflating a tire or something, or a balloon, that if balloon got inflated, then it got deflated. Like she wasn't pregnant. And this kind of carries with her idea of sickness, and we see the term hysteria also coming in, like these are hysteric people, they do not quite have control over themselves. And so, and this is also George drawing out secrets from Nick. This is him giving him alcohol, giving him stuff, and this is him drawing out secrets out of him. And So George asks Nick, what will you have? So again Nick says that bourbon, so getting bourbon. And now George tells Nick a tale. Again, this is one of the tales that you don't know if it's true or false or who it happened with, but it's just like pure possibility in the terms. It could be, it could not be. But if we would see that how they act out, even if in the context of the true play, they assume a truth value of their own, which cannot be denied. And it's about the tale of a few young boys who go to a bar, and one of them orders Virgin. So you can understand that he probably wanted to order bourbon, but he didn't know what the name was, so he said Virgin. So everyone laughed. If it was a matter of laughter, if you read through this passage, that everyone laughed and everyone continued laughing. It's a joke that didn't stop. Everyone else in the bar started ordering virgins to mock the child's speech. And so again, like this mocking of child speech, it is very interesting in the play, because we have seen that how so many terms in the play are often childish. There is a sort of childish nagging sense. So that playing of childishness and adult people it's very interesting play. Then we'll see other references to being childlike in the play also later on. So, but George says that I was present there and we had drunk a lot, and that was one of the grandest days of my youth. And so it was by the boy, there was a boy who shot his mother. And Nick asks what happened to the boy, and George says, no, I will not tell you. It is the same boy who tells this story of Virgin, who orders that Virgin, mispronounces it rather. And then George goes on to say that not only did the boy shoot his mother, he also killed his father when he was trying to learn driving with his father, and he swerved with the car to save a porcupine on the road and crashed it against the tree, where the father also died. So he inadvertently or advertently, we don't know, like, because intentions are very difficult to understand in the play, kills his parents. And George says that then what happens, he was sent in the hospital, and I'm reading this passage. When he was conscious and out of danger, and when they told him that his father was dead, he began to laugh, I have been told, and his laughter grew and he would not stop. And it was not until after they jammed a needle in his arm, not until after that, until his consciousness slipped away from him, that his laughter subsided, stopped. And when he was recovered from his injuries through enough so that he could be moved without damage should he struggle, he was put in an asylum. That was 30 years ago. So see this thing, that this laughter, this maniacal laughter, this mad laughter. So we just talked about witches and evils, right? About witches and devils. So this maniacal laughter sort of goes with that they're laughing maniacally, this child who has killed his parents. And after that, the child is given a shot, an injection through which he slumbers. And you realize that this kind of slumbering, this kind of escaping the world through an injection, escaping a reality or a very gross reaction to the reality through slumber, is also paralleled in the adult's habit of consuming alcohol. So the adults are also consuming alcohol in a way that kind of puts them in a place like this, that they are trying to escape a world, and there is maniacal laughter, there is weird fun and games over the misery of people. And that childishness is also something that does not quite leave the adults. You cannot separate the children from the adults in a sense in the play. And Nick is engrossed by the play story, and he says, is he still there? George says, oh yes, and I'm told for these 30 years he has not uttered one sound. So he has gone quiet for the last 30 years. He has just gone quiet, hasn't said anything. So again we have this reference here that Martha is making coffee for Nick, for Honey, who is like hysterically going up and down constantly. There is no balance to her, and we said like this sobriety, moderation, propriety, balancing, these are also like things that do not happen in the play. So we have a character who's like going up and going down according to these descriptions. And George says about insane people that they do not change, that they don't grow old. So again we see this childlike quality about insane people, and You also feel like these people, while they're drunk, they're getting more and more insane. And at one point, if you read the play, you'll see that George saying Nick asking George, do you get drunk beyond a certain point, even if you're taking drinks? Then George says, you do, but things slow down, you slumber more. It's like a kind of being like losing the charge of your consciousness slowly as you keep drinking and drinking. And you'd see that that is what he said happened to the boy who got injected with that kind of injection, with that kind of shot. So there is this parallelism, right? There is this parallelism that they don't change, that they don't grow old. And these are people who are also not refusing in a certain way to grow old. They are too busy in their fun and games, in the games that they're playing. And here George says that Martha doesn't have hysterical pregnancies. Yes, Martha does not have pregnancies at all. So this is again a clue that probably the lie they're telling, that the story they're telling about having a child, having a son, is a lie. And here again we have references to language games. So George says to Nick that, oh, well, is a comfort, a beanbag, about his son. And Nick says, a what? George says, a beanbag, you wouldn't understand. And then he like overpronounces it like beanbag. And Nick says, I heard you. I didn't say I was deaf. I said I didn't understand. And George says, you didn't say that at all. And we again come back to this idea of language games that we had discussed before. Like, what are people saying? What are people communicating? Are you saying what you're trying to say? So this gap between what you're saying and what you're communicating, that opens up the play. That opens up this play, that makes this possible, this play, and that opens up also the language, the play of languages. That is what I'm saying and what you're getting. There will always be a little bit of a gap, a little bit of slipperiness in it. And there is the possibility of multiple meaning making, multiple observations come in. That is the possibility. That's what makes play possible. And here at this place, if you see that when Martha is coming, again she's entering the stage, George says, hark, forest sounds. So those animal metaphors become very explicit and very animal noises, forest sounds, very in your face as you keep reading the play. And here you have the idea that, that why do you marry a person? What are the motivations of marrying another person? And somehow money becomes a huge motivator of why somebody is marrying someone. So we see that Martha's father is also the president of the college where they teach, and Nick says that Honey's father also had a lot of money. So money becomes a huge motivator of why people would marry someone. And he's saying that things are simpler with you. You marry a woman because she's all blown up, while I, in my clumsy old-fashioned way. But their real intentions, if we can ever get to such real intentions, we don't know why they actually got married. And Nick says that, wait, you see, it's not like that. And Nick says there were other things why I married her. And George says, yes, to compensate. And Nick says yes, and George says that yes, there are. I know that there always are things to compensate, but it seems like it's more about themselves, how they feel about themselves, than it is about how actually they feel about their wives. And so Nick says that our relationship goes a long back, because when they were very young, they used to play when he was probably 6 or 8, and you see this play, like again it talks about childhood sexuality in a way, which makes it very problematic, because we see that this childhood adult dichotomy is often taken away. So the world of the child and the world of the adult somehow mix very violently, and that is something we often also fail to take into consideration, that we think that the world of the child is very different from the world of the adult, while we discount the fact that the child lives in the same world that the adult lives in, that they often encounter in their everyday world the same things that adults would. So to protect them from encountering certain experiences that we believe should be reserved for adults, we have different things like parental locks, parental guidance. We have ratings on movies like 12 plus or 13 plus or 16 plus or 18 plus. So we have these different thresholds set for the child, that okay, this is what it can take, this is what it cannot take. But in this play you will see this mixing of, again we talked about how this play does these devious mixings, which make things problematic, this child and the adult. So they used to play doctor, Nick and Honey, when they were very young, and George calls that a very good heterosexual beginning. And we see that, right? I mean, these are two heterosexual couples that are talking with each other here, amongst each other. And they got married because they had this connection from a very young age. And here again, like we mentioned, how George is slowly getting, like, weaving a net and weaving a web where he's slowly drawing Nick in. And George says, tell me about your wife's money. Like, it's a very impertinent request to make. And Nick, suddenly suspicious, says, why? George says, well, don't then. Nick says, what do you want to know about my wife's money for, huh? It's like something very personal. And they both say that, okay, our fathers-in-law, they have money. Martha's father has been robbing this place blind for years. And Nick says his father was more like a preacher who made a lot of money, God's money. And he says, my father-in-law, he was a man of the Lord and he was very rich. So we see a lot of godmen becoming rich these days also. You can become rich by becoming a godman. And so, and if you see that, if we think that this is a man who's preaching Christianity, and Christ himself preached against this accumulation of wealth, but here we have a different kind of preaching which is also for the accumulation of wealth. So these paradoxes that we have made part of our lives, that is very highlighted very nicely, and those paradoxes become, which would otherwise be very obvious to us, they kind of become stark. The opposition in the logic becomes stark to us by this kind of plays. And so we see that they both had a lot of money. So Nick, till now, in his motivations for marrying Honey, has mentioned that Honey's father had money and she had got pregnant, hysteric pregnancy. Not is there once a mention of love, that I loved her, that we were together since childhood and our parents thought we'll always get married, stuff like that. Here, like Nick says about Martha's got money because Martha's father's second wife, not Martha's mother, but after Martha's mother died, was a very old lady with warts, was very rich. And Nick says she was a witch. And George says she was a good witch and married the white mouse. So you see, like, this kind of bestiality, the idea of bestiality, this Walpurgisnacht, this kind of the night of revelries of devils and witches, this becomes so interesting here. We actually have references to witches and animals and bestiality. And again, like Nick says, your wife never mentioned a stepmother, so you don't know at any point which narrative is true, which narrative is false. You're just always left hanging. What is true? You don't ever know that. And George says, well, maybe it isn't true, but that's the thing, right? I mean, Nick has been blurting out certain truths, so that we'll know after a certain time. And you see here, George says that he has been building a web for him. You realize, of course, that I have been drawing you out on this stuff, not because I am interested in your terrible livelihood, but only because you represent a direct and pertinent threat to my livelihood, and I want to get the goods on you. So he's saying that I want to get the goods on you. I want to tease out information from you. And Nick says, still, I mean, sure. So he's not very sure of the damage that George can do to him yet. And George says, I mean, I've warned you and you stand warned. Nick says, I stand warned. It's you sneaky types that worry me the most. You ineffectual sons of bitches, you are the worst. And George says, yes, we are sneaky. An elbow to your stilly blue eye and knee to your solid gold groin, we are the worst. And we'll see how sneaky George gets. We'll see that soon. And that idea of taking him in, it has been like, if we think of it, a web is also been referred to here, it's the metaphor of the quicksand. So the quicksand is also something, right? You walk on it, you think it's the same land, but once you get on it, it slowly sucks you, and the more you kind of try to get out of it, the more you get enmeshed in it, and it finally takes you in slowly. So, and George says, before you know, sucked down. So we have this stage is being built for something now. And here George says that I've tried to reach you, to communicate, to make contact. Yes. Nick says, to communicate. Yes, exactly. Nick says, oh, that is touching, that is downright moving, that is what it is. Then with sudden vehemence he says, up yours. So you see, right? I mean, that is what we are talking about, this need to make contact, this need to make, he says that I know I've been trying to do that. Then Nick says, up yours. So he doesn't care. Then Nick says threateningly, you heard me. So he kind of gives him the license, like do whatever you please to do. And let's see then what happens. And now here we have Honey has again entered the stage, and so Nick has been talking about her behind her back. She doesn't know what has been told about her. So she comes and she says that, why just before we got married I developed appendicitis, or everybody thought it was appendicitis, but it turned out to be it was a false alarm. So you know, she kind of thinks that it was not appendicitis. The narrative was that she might have been pregnant. So she is lying again. But this is a lie we have caught very easily, because I mean Nick just gave a contradictory account right now, which will turn out to be the true one. So people are lying. I mean, this is also a lie that might have passed if we had not known the countering narrative to it. And Honey is in the set, and so there are different references to other things also happening. We'll get to that point. So here, so George again, like mentioned the voyeurism, how it takes into account, this play takes into account the gaze of the people, the audience, the people present. That George says that about like when we're alone, maybe to stress that they are not alone. Martha says we're alone, but George says, no love, we've got guests. So I would like you to pick up on these scenarios where these kind of things take place, that where they mention that we have guests and we are being looked at, we are in the presence of company, which takes into account also, you know, the audience would also know that we are being taken into account, and they would be, rather than being like this ominous, like, you know, this third person omniscient, rather not ominous, third person omniscient watchers, they would also be implicated in the play. They can't just sit back and watch. They would also be implicated in the play, implicated in their watching. And at one point that they're like talking, that Martha is saying that, okay, we've had enough of trash talk. Will you put a record on and shut up? George says, certainly love. How are we going to work this? Mixed doubles. So you see again, like mixing has this very weird connotation in the play, very problematic connotations, and mixed doubles also has a very problematic connotations here. It's like a couples have come and they're mixing, and their mixing creates another kind of problem. I don't know how they're going, which coupling is going to take form next. And with that idea of other people watching and getting at it, we have this idea of spilling secrets. What can you say and what can you not say? What secrets, what intimate secrets can you share with another person and what you cannot share? And so Martha at a point says that, you know, the story of the boy that George was talking about is actually his own story, that he killed his parents and everything, and he's planning to write it as a novel, and something funny in his past, and with Georgie boy here turned into a novel, his first happened and also his last. Hey, I rhymed. And George is saying, I warn you, Martha. So there is this idea that, you know, and we said like George and Martha being an elderly couple who have been together longer, they also have their own rules of engagement. They also know how they're engaging, how they're making it. So he's also telling, like, he's playing this game, that as Martha is telling that, you know, this hideous secret about George, George is also playing like don't say it, which makes it like makes the secret seem real, more real than it probably actually is, makes it seem more hideous than it probably is, or even like real, that gives it a sense of reality. If he didn't protest, if he just said, that is a lie, then this play wouldn't work like that. He's also, while she is spilling the secrets, he's also protesting the more vehemently to almost show that these are very hideous, dark secrets that we keep that are being spilled. And you know that another couple has been brought in who are looking at this, and Nick has already started playing that game. He has also already inadvertently given out some secrets about his life which are actually true. Well, we don't know a lot of things whether about the other couple, George and Martha, whether they're true. The center story that they say about their son, that is not true. But through that kind of game playing, that kind of make-believe, the real world crashes into the make-believe. Nick probably cannot make the distinction anymore that, okay, these are make-believe secrets or whatever, and he kind of contributes with his own reality. Honey, in a sense, has a better sense because she says that I was sick because of appendicitis. She really still believes that secrets should be secrets. They should be kept in a manner. They should be honored. But Nick has gone beyond that point. And here we see that it's again that emasculating figure of the daddy returning for George, who again, like towards George's dreams of his novel, calls it a bad novel and says, and you see this, a novel about a naughty boy child. So a naughty boy child who's not quite a boy child, is almost, this naughtiness has a very ominous sense, that this naughtiness makes him not quite a child. And this says, who killed his mother and his father dead. So makes it about George, that it was George who was telling about himself. And Honey again is like enjoying this kind of thing, violence, and she's having a lot of fun. And Martha says, why? The idea, a teacher at a respected conservative institution like this, in a town like New Carthage, publishing a book like that. If you respect your position here, young man, young whippersnapper, you'll just withdraw the manuscript. So that's the thing, right? I mean, there is this contradictory talk about propriety and the lack of propriety. We see that in this society, in this, how could any propriety be possible? But at the same time, there is a lot of on the face, surface propriety that people carry on with them. And Martha here says that Georgie said, but daddy, I mean, but sir, it isn't a novel at all. Not a novel? No, sir, it's not a novel at all. Then George says that you will not say this. Again, we see that kind of thing, that it stresses the idea of how hideous a secret is being revealed, even though all of this might not have happened. There might not have been a child who killed his parents. George might not have written a novel on that, and that child might never be George. But we don't know that. Martha says, and says that he said, no sir, this isn't a novel at all. This is the truth. This really happened to me. And George says, I'll kill you. It's almost, so you see these things, that how they highlight the sense of telling the secret, these reactions, these prohibitions that work as a sort of enabling gesture. So the more he's prohibiting, the more he's saying no, he's actually almost saying yes, yes, do it, continue. It's a very problematic area to go there. And you have here George calling Martha the satanic bitch. So we have this reference to witches constantly coming up. And if you keep in mind, the next act is called exorcism. So you get that sense that, you know, that we have these ghosts piling up, and secrets are also like ghosts. They are also like figures of the past that haunt us, to come to haunt us. We'll talk about that more as we read through. And after this has all happened, George recovers his composure and he says, well, that's one game. What shall we do now? Huh? Martha says, let's think of something. George himself is saying, let's think of something else. We have played Humiliate the Host. We have gone through that one. What shall we do now? And they plan that one of the games, like again, it's very vulgar in this manner, that George says that we could play a game called Hum the Hostess, but it's a game they put up for a later time. But instead of that, he suggests that now we play Get the Guests. It's another game, that it's Get the Guests. And Honey is already kind of not into it. She says, I don't like these games. So you realize that she says that she's already not liking it. So what's coming will probably like increase her inconvenience, increase her disturbance more. So it kind of sets the stage, if we, pun intended, I mean, if we look at it like that, it sets the stage for every kind of interaction. And what George does here is that he kind of comes in and bears the secret that Nick had told him. You know, and we remember that Nick had told him it in a very off-handed way, in a very off manner kind of way, like it's just something he's saying. But now we understand that what the repercussions of such games can be. And he says that it's a bucolic, you see, and the story about Nick and Honey. And this nice young couple comes out of the Middle West, and he's blonde and about 30, and he's a scientist, a teacher, a scientist, and his mouse is a wifey little type. And you see, this is again like, his wife is not a mousy little type, but his mouse is a wifey little type, who gargles brandy all the time and they got to know each other when they was only teensy little types, and they used to get under the vanity table and poke around, and Nick is starting to understand what this story about. He says like, just a minute, you can't say that. And if you realize that the audience have already heard this story once before, but it is the way of presentation, it's the way of who do you tell this story that hurts. It's more about the reaction of Honey than it's about telling the story again. How this is operating right now, because the audience already knows it, but how devastating it can be for someone to know what that person hasn't known yet. This is my Honey dreamily says, I want to hear stories, I love stories. Again, she thinks that, she said a little bit before that I'm not comfortable, but now she says that she was not comfortable with games, but she's comfortable with stories. But we see that here, games, stories, everything becomes very convoluted, everything becomes very problematic. There's nothing innocent about them at all. And he talks about taking money from the father-in-law, and Nick says that, you know, that I don't think you're doing this by, and Nick threatening George now, I don't think you'd better go on, mister. See, this is the same way that George has been threatening Martha, that do not go on. So Nick has been participating in their plays. He has been picking up rules. These are also rules. How do you stop someone when they're spilling a secret? So these are also rules. These are also like rules of suffering in a way. What do you say when you're at the point of suffering, when you're feeling like you're about to suffer? And Nick says, no, I don't think you'd better. Don't say this story. And Honey says, I love familiar stories. They are the best, right? I mean, this is such a, she doesn't know what's coming right now, and the familiar stories are probably the worst. And he says that, and he had this baggage with him, and part of this baggage was in the form of this mouse, that to get the money he had to marry the mouse. And Nick says that this isn't fair of you, that you can't be saying these things. And George says that perhaps it's not, but like I said, his mouse, she tooted brandy immodestly and spent half of her time in the upchuck, which is vomiting. And Honey said, I know these people. And if we are at this point also like, we also know these people, right? We are knowing these people. And she's like, this is a defamiliarized knowing, right? This is the defamiliarizing the familiar. So literature, if we think about, there's an essay by Victor Shklovsky on these lines. I will put it in the forum about the art of defamiliarization. So this is what, this is a familiar story being presented as unfamiliarized, as defamiliarized, which when Honey is hearing, she is getting familiarized to it again, but in a different manner. She cannot be familiar with it the way she was before. And Honey says here that, I don't like this story. Nick says, please, please don't. There's pleading. There's pleading against which it is done. You know, this is very sadistic in a way. There's this sadistic pleasure, this masochistic pleasure that is being taken in this kind of infliction of pain. You want the other person to say, no, I'm hurting, I don't want you to inflict this kind of pain. But the more the other person says, the more you feel relish in your infliction of pain in the play. And see, George here says, beg, baby. So it's something he's enjoying. He wants him to beg. And says like, how they got married. We're going to a flashback. And he says, the mouse got all puffed up one day, and she went over to Blondie's house, and she stuck out her puff, and she said, look at me. Honey said, white on her feet, so the blood is leaving her. I don't like this. She's understanding what is up, how it is being told. And you see also that how storytelling and sympathy works, that a story being told with a certain sympathy will read in a different manner, but this is a world devoid of any sympathy. There is only pain and hurt left, and there is only inflicting of more pain and more hurt. There is no place for sympathy here. The same way Nick never sympathized with George. There are no sympathetic connections. Nick was laughing at George and everything, and so this is like an eye for an eye kind of society right now. And so in the culmination, after he's done telling the story, we see Honey with outlandish horror. You told them, oh no, you couldn't have told them, oh no. So this is a violation, right? I mean, this is a violation of tales you cannot tell, stories you cannot say. This is a violation of trust. But we see that is what has been happening, and a relationship of a husband and wife is a relationship of trust. And that core is being destroyed slowly through this play. And George says abruptly and with some disgust, and that's how you play with the game, get the guests. Honey says, I'm going to be sick, and George says, naturally, with a sort of like, he's kind of showing a sort of distance almost, but you see that abruptly and with some disgust. It's like almost eviscerating someone, and while you are pretending to take joy in it, you also don't, like, people don't know if he's actually had taken a lot of joy in it, or it's just bitter retaliation. There's this problem also, that what kind of joy is it? After he's done, he's probably disgusted with himself. This is not a cathartic activity if you think about it. So there was this idea of the Aristotelian play, which would be cathartic, which would be a release of emotions, which would bring you to a level. But this kind of increases disgust, this kind of increases the vehemence, the bile that you feel inside at this point of the play. So with that, we end today's lecture, and we'll complete the rest of Act 2 and the whole of Act 3 in the next one. Thank you for listening.